Welcome to the At Last Podcast, Episode 8, with Björn Öste, CEO of Swedish-based oat milk company Oatly. Originally founded by Björn's older brother Rickard, based on research from the Lund University in Sweden, which found that a majority of the world's population was lactose intolerant. With this in mind, as well as a variety of other factors, such as the immense environmental costs of agriculture, the inhumane treatment of dairy cows, as well as the overall nutritional value, Oatly set out on a 25-year journey to perfect their oat milk recipe and deliver it to the public. Oatly is a proud proponent of what they call the post-milk generation. We live on a planet where our resources are rapidly diminishing, and temperatures are rising to unsustainable levels. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, dairy cattle are responsible for almost 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, and the consumption of animal products contributes to more than 1/4 of the water footprint of humanity. Oatly believes in creating something that is not only in tune with the needs of humans, but also the planet. If man wishes to have a future on this planet, and indeed a scientific one, I believe we must all learn to follow Oatly's guiding principle: science guided by nature.
We're good. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I wanted to begin today with a quote, actually, that I had found. It's by Abba Ibn, and he said, "History teaches us that men and nations only behave wisely once they have exhausted all other alternatives." Now, according to Professor Arjen Hoekstra from the University of Twente in the Netherlands, global water footprint of agriculture is 2,422 billion cubic meters of water. So that's essentially 1/4 of the total global water footprint. And 19% of this is directly related to dairy cattle. So as you can imagine, it's a very, very large problem, one that we'll have to solve in the future. And especially when it comes to agriculture, we are beginning to exhaust all of our alternatives. In addition to this, there's also health crises that have emerged with lactose intolerance. And this is where you come in. This is where Oatly comes in. Now, your brother was involved with the guy who actually discovered lactose intolerance. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, Professor Arne at the University of Lund. He discovered that when he was a guest researcher in Chicago and tried to repeat some studies that were done on Swedes, and when he came to the U.S. and he repeated the studies, it didn't work. His people got sick and didn't feel good, and he couldn't figure out for his life what was the problem. One thing led to the other, and discovered that, holy moly, there are people on this planet that can't drink milk.
Wow.
Exclamation mark. And of course, Scandinavia is still today one of the regions in the world with the least prevalence of lactose intolerance, right? So when you come with that myopic worldview and think that whatever we can do, everybody else can do, it's easy to make mistakes. But from mistakes we learn, and hence lactose intolerance was discovered.
Absolutely.
It should really be, it's really a faulty term, right? Because the majority of the world population is by definition lactose intolerant. So it's really the people that are lactose tolerant that are the exception.
I see.
At old age, it's a natural, it's a way for nature to teach the baby to wean it off the mother's breast.
Right.
All animals have
Right.
that, right? So you get breastfed for maybe a year, 2 years, and then gradually the body stops the ability to produce an enzyme called lactases. Lactases will break down lactose into shorter sugars that are easier to digest. And when you stop having that enzyme, the very complex carbohydrates that are the lactoses will come down into the intestines, and they cause all sorts of nuisance, rumblings and flatulence and stomach pain and whatnot, depending on who And so also lactose intolerance in itself is not a digital one or you have it or you don't have it. It's a very gradual sloping scale, right? So some people are more, you have some lactases production or more of it or less of it or none at all, right? So.
Right. Wow. So it's so interesting that you mentioned that in your culture in particular, in Scandinavian culture, there's not very many people that are lactose intolerant. However, when you examine the other cultures, such as when you're looking at the Japanese culture, it's anywhere as much as 95% of lactose intolerance, and Native American 47%. So once you start getting outside of the Caucasian race, you start getting much higher races of lactose intolerance in cultures which weren't necessarily reared with dairy cattle, as you said before. And
but it's not only Caucasians that are lactose tolerant. There are, for example, tribes or populations in Africa, the Masai most notoriously, are lactose tolerant.
Really?
Which is really fascinating, right? Which I think is part of the belief. There's a similar group in the Western Africa too. And in the case of Masai, they are nomads, and they have by tradition always herded cows. And they've been priding themselves on the ability to drink milk.
Wow.
And they grew up, or where they live, or used to, traditionally live and roam. They were surrounded by a bunch of other nomad tribes that were all lactose intolerant.
So it's a source of pride for them, the fact that they're able to tolerate.
Very much so.
Wow.
Very much so.
That's fascinating. I never knew that.
Oh yeah. So and there are other pockets around the world, right? So I guess the leading theory behind lactose tolerance is, I say, good old Darwinism, for lack of better, right? Or intelligent design, depending on what you want. But in areas of need, the survival of the fittest, the people that could survive, and you could easily imagine a harsh Scandinavian climate where it was, you could possibly have the people that could consume whatever you could get from the cow had an advantage, and add a couple of hundred generations or whatnot, I don't know, but all of a sudden the fittest survived, and those were the ones that had the best ability to consume dairy products.
Of course, and that harsh Scandinavian climate which you're referring to, this is also what makes the Swedish oats unique, is their ability to withstand these extreme conditions, right? This incredible cold. And
I think it's not so much the cold that is beneficial for the oats per se. It's more the rather humid and not so hot summers. So we see that oats that grow in very dry, like in Saskatchewan, the biggest oat producing region in North America, right? The oat kernels are maybe half the size of the oat kernels that we have in our part of the world.
Really?
But you can see that you just go from Saskatchewan to northern Quebec, for example, and there are regions that cultivate oats that is much more like Scandinavian oats.
Wow.
And you can look at the other side of the globe. You go to New Zealand, you go to Argentina, you go to Chile, and you find bigger, hardier oats.
That's amazing. And just mainly due to the climate, essentially.
Yeah, growth conditions, yes.
Okay. And you started, Oatly was founded in the 1990s, and you had based it on research from the Lund University, is that correct?
My brother is a professor at Lund University, and as we talked about earlier, he as a young student learned about and grew up in an academic environment where there was a lot of research around lactose intolerance, and I think one thing led to the other. Late 1980s, he was on a trip in Japan and discovered that people were drinking soy milk and thought that was an odd thing, right?
Right.
It didn't taste particularly good either. But the notion and the idea of developing a perfect milk has sort of been an academic challenge for him and his colleagues, right? And the milk, if you look at it, milk is the only beverage that is a full meal. It contains protein, fat, carbohydrates. No other beverages do that. You can live off milk, obviously, right? The baby, that's the only food they get.
Right.
And that's also what makes it such a powerful, I guess, traditionally, such a powerful product in times of hardship. And I think that in its turn has been part of the reason why it's such a heralded and almost holy product in the Western culture. Right? Don't mess with my milk, right? Do whatever you want, but don't mess with my milk, right?
Absolutely.
And so it comes out of a very strong cultural connection with the people that grew up and knew that was an important staple for survival, for nutrients. Fresh milk, unprocessed, consumed in the middle of the winter would even give you a small supply of vitamin C, which obviously you can't get in milk today, right? Unless it's added. But so yeah, we can all understand the origin of this. But in the modern world, our problem is not lack of nutrients and lack of food, it's exactly the opposite. We eat way too much of everything, and in particular, I would argue we eat too much protein, right? Although a very large portion of the U.S. population seems to think that they don't get enough protein, which is completely ludicrous.
I know that there's always been sort of that scramble. Now you have diets like the paleo diet, which emphasizes focusing more on protein and straying away from carbohydrates and things of that nature. Now, I did read that the process in which you make your product is actually based on nature's process.
So going back to what they set off to do, they wanted to coming back to some of the issues with milk in today's world. First of all, it's too much protein for our meal. If you look at it as a balance between protein, fat, and carbohydrates, right? So if you consume a lot of dairy, you overcharge on that aspect. But lactose intolerance certainly is a problem, and it's a problem that's become prevalent, I'd say, the last 20, 30 years. More so, it's not necessarily so that people are more prone to lactose intolerance. I don't think there's any proof of that. It's more the intermingle of cultures, the Western culture with our coffee and milk and ice cream, and our dairy culture is spreading, and of course, if you look at the American population, it's very much consisting today of people that come from lactose intolerant backgrounds, like Hispanics and Asians and African Americans and whatnot, right? And Native Americans, as you mentioned. So all of a sudden you have a much more complex society, but everybody's sort of uniting around this dairy culture. This causes people to all of a sudden discover that maybe I could drink milk as a child, maybe up in my teens, or consume more dairy. And as I grow older, I lose that ability. It's totally normal.
Absolutely.
But there's another allergy, milk protein allergy, that seems to be increasing, and comes which is related to, or maybe if not related, but soy protein allergies. I mean, a lot of protein allergies that seems to grow in prevalence, right, and cause problems. And gluten, gluten is another protein that more and more people seem to be intolerant to, and whatnot. So milk, again, is not so perfect in the modern world. And then add to that the whole sustainability aspect of the water footprint you talk about, the carbon dioxide, I think it stands for the milk and dairy production is 30-40% of the global carbon dioxide. I mean, more than automotive and airline, and so clearly from an environmental perspective. And we have the animal husbandry politics and policies around mega farms with 20-30,000 heads, right? It's a lot of environmental and animal rights activism.
Of course.
Around that, have to be said some good reason, right? When you see some of these mega farms, it's not a pretty sight, and it stinks, and it just pollutes, and you have these big reservoirs that collects the manure and the urine, and nasty.
They had clauses. There was a great documentary. I don't know if you ever watched this, Food Inc., Food Incorporated, and they had clauses built into certain poultry suppliers and dairy suppliers as well, but in which you were not allowed to film the conditions under which the animals were being housed. And that was one of the major clauses in the contract.
Awful.
And so that does raise a interesting moral dilemma. because as of today, the FDA says there's 9 million dairy cows in the United States alone. That's down 13 million from 1950 when they did the census.
Yeah.
But we produce more milk today than we did in 1950.
Yeah.
So the amount of strain that they must be putting on those animals, with 13 million less animals,
Crazy.
and still we're producing more milk. I mean, you can imagine it must not be ideal conditions.
Yeah, it's crazy. And there are people far better to talk about that than me, certainly. But I think it's easy for all of us to agree that the big farms, and the dairy industry loves to portray the picture of the cute cow in the field that's grazing with the baby cow next to it.
On the cover, always of the milk,
Yeah, and it's so false, such a false picture.
Yeah.
It's so little of that remaining. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think very often I feel sorry for a lot of the smaller dairy farmers that try to do a good job, but they have no way to compete. It's
Right.
just, the industry is driving towards this big farm production.
Right.
So when my brother began back looking at dairy as, on one hand, an ideal food factor, right? Format, you can package it, you can keep it. If you have a so-called UHT package, you can store it for up to a year, if not even more, and ideal in many situations, but comes at a very high price. So let's do something similar, but much more intelligent, right? Let's base it on a plant, not an animal. That
Right.
will take care of a big chunk of the sustainability issue. If we carefully select the right plant, we will avoid most of the allergy and intolerance issues. In other aspects of you look at the feeding the world, and there are a lot of poor people and people, in crisis situations and whatnot, and you can't really bring in dairy products there because there might be cultural issues, kosher or halal or other aspects, right? The Copts in the Christian Copts in Egypt, for example, have very strict regulations on when and how they can eat dairy and animal products, and so we all come across this, even if we're not necessarily Orthodox Jews or
Right.
Muslims, right?
Right.
But the halal and the kosher aspect. So that's all tied to the fact that you have an animal product here, right? So with the plant-based product, you'll avoid all that.
Of course, yes.
And dairy, again, it's not far from ideal. The protein quality could be discussed. Fat, certainly the fat in the dairy is certainly something we do everything we can to remove.
Right.
So it doesn't have much of carbs to talk for, and certainly no dietary fibers. So with those inputs, they started looking at them. I think they scanned and looked and did trials with some 80 different plants from all over the world, and it tended to come back to oats as one standing out as a very unique product with documented health properties, dietary fiber and ability to lower cholesterol, for example, or increase. It's a prebiotic and increases your microbiota, provides a good gut environment, right? All these things comes with the magic oat fibers, the so-called beta-glucans, and I think not least important was taste, to get the product
Of
that actually
course,
tastes
that's
good.
always the final frontier, right?
Yeah. So without a good taste, you can give up.
Right.
And I think soy milk it's certainly not as big anymore in North America nor in Europe than it was if you go back about 10 years, when it was very trendy and growing. But it seemed there was always a strong resistance, and I think it grew to the point where the people that could tolerate the flavor accepted it, but it could never break through that glass ceiling and be bigger and more dominant and take over the dairy, so to speak. And then it turned out that there's some health issues with soy protein and some of the hormones in soy. So and not to mention the GMO and burning of rainforests in South America and all that stuff.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So there's been damped up demand in the market for something better than soy, that tastes better, that's more nutritious, healthier, and whatnot. And I think the first contender to fill that space here in the U.S. is almond milk, which unfortunately is you take one poison instead of another.
Right.
10% of all California's water goes to production of almond, and living in California, as I do now, we all know that water is something we don't have all that much of anymore, right?
Right, and that was interesting. A lot of the dairy cows we were referring to earlier were based in California.
Yeah, I think the statistics is 25% of all dairy production in the U.S. is in California.
Wow,
which is
insane.
Crazy.
Insane.
It's absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah, especially seeing the pictures of the most recent droughts,
right?
Which they're recovering from now, but there was some very dire circumstances.
Oh yeah, and I mean the groundwater is not repleted. I mean that's still very low, so people are pumping up water, and it'll take one big hot summer, and we already seen how hot it is there now. So hopefully we'll have some more extremely rainy winters,
right?
For many years to come.
Absolutely,
to correct that problem, but.
We'll need them, yeah.
That seems highly risky, right?
Yeah, to put that much faith in.
Yeah.
I hope. I mean, that goes all the way back to the ancient times. I hope this will be a bountiful harvest. We're almost praying to the rain gods, hoping for.
So almond came and took that, but the nutritional value of almond milk, what is about 2% almond in almond milk? It's really nothing, right? And most commercial almond milks, number one ingredient is sugar.
Yeah, which was the interesting thing. So in the study I referenced earlier, Professor Hoekstra also found that the water footprint of all animal products is significantly larger than that of a wisely chosen crop product with equivalent or more nutritional value. So the fact that he says a wisely chosen crop product is key here, because if you go and you look at the data, he makes no mention of almonds. It's oats.
Right. Yeah.
It's oats that he's referencing in his study, because because of the almonds, as you mentioned. In America, we use tons of pesticides, just an inane amount of pesticides, and in Sweden, it's actually your government have they banned pesticides? Is that what it is? Or?
Yeah. I'm not fully up to date on the exact legislation on that note, but certainly when this oats we source in Sweden it's not necessarily always organically certified, but they never use pesticides.
Mm-hmm.
So and we also have really good soils there, so there's very little, if any at all, of heavy metals or any other products that tends to at times be prevalent in grains, right?
Right.
So we pride ourselves with our high quality, very clean, pure oats.
And you should be proud. And if you would just hold this is the product here, Oatly. And I've tried it myself. It's delicious. I'm not being paid to say that. I actually really love it. It is phenomenal, because you do have this stigma of like, it's great. It's almond milk. Oh, it's oat milk. Because you're so used to it just tasting horrendous, or just or there's always a sacrifice for nutrition, it seems.
Yeah.
But with this, it's not like that. And then you said something too. I should mention that you're independently owned, which is amazing in today's day and age. And also, I love that you said something the other day that really caught my attention. But it was something to the effect of, I don't own the brand. I'm merely a custodian of the brand, and it's my customers who own the brand.
Yes.
And I thought that was a really beautiful sentiment.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we learned that early on. That obviously we have a whole range in Scandinavia and Europe now. We have a whole range of products. We have our oat dairy, so to speak, right? We make everything a dairy would do, except maybe hard cheese. We make milk, yogurts, creams, sour creams, ice creams, spread cheeses.
Wow.
We have a whole range of beverages, of course. This one here is particularly developed with the cappuccino espresso
yes.
coffee latte
Yes.
crowd in mind, right? Works
Yes.
exceptionally well in coffee and makes a very nice foam if you're into latte art.
Right. That's important with the barista culture that's going on now.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Um,
So we sponsor throwdown competitions here in New York right now, and we'll do across the U.S. Right? Baristas compete in making the prettiest latte art,
Yes.
most inventive and whatnot. And I think we get incredible feedback from them.
I was going
Very
to
positive.
I was
So
going
we're
to-
very happy about that, of course.
absolutely. I was going to mention the feedback. I'm glad you brought that up because you've mentioned that recently you've gone into your newest foray into the world of oats, if you will, is a baby formula, which is based on the Oatly product. Is that correct?
Well, it's a separate company, and we use the oat milk as a component and as an ingredient in the baby formula.
Okay.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes, and that's been launched under the brand name Utto,
Oatu.
from the son of the original founders. The name of the original founder's son. So yeah, I mean, we see this, and we were developing now on a similar project. We're developing a beverage, oat-based beverage that's highly nutritious, that's targeting senior people that have difficulties chewing or otherwise eating, maybe after post-surgery or that are just, that part of their life when eating and chewing is particularly difficult.
Right.
And we find there also exceptionally good results. And people love it. It's easy for them to eat it, and they get a lot of nutrients. It's
That's
very
fantastic.
easy to add any nutrients that doesn't come naturally with the oats.
Right.
Like a vitamin D, for example, or a vitamin E. We have even done studies. We had Chinese school children drinking Oatly once a day for a whole year.
Wow.
In a small pack, and because the Chinese health ministry that were actually conducting the study were concerned about iron deficiencies among particularly the younger girls. Then, so we iron fortified it, and that worked out really, really well. And iron status on the kids was really nice after 1 year. So
Really interesting.
yeah.
Wow.
And the bone mass grew in that 1 year study significantly more than any study made on dairy anywhere in the planet has showed. So we could argue that a calcium fortified Oatly delivers calcium significantly better than dairy milk.
Wow, that's so interesting. And as you mentioned earlier, especially in young kids and infants and in the baby stage, sometimes mothers can have, if you have an exceptionally hungry baby, it can have difficulties producing enough milk for them.
Right.
And so we had someone mention that she loved Oatly as a supplement for that because she was just unable to produce enough milk, and so she was able to supplement her breast milk with some formula based on the oat formula.
Mixed with oat, perfect.
And she said that the baby just loved it absolutely because she tried everything. She tried all these different formulas, and the baby just really didn't like it.
It all comes back to oats having a very neutral, slightly nutty flavor, I guess, that we find very, very few in blind tastings anywhere, or in any kind of situation, very few people that react negatively to the taste.
Right.
Absolutely, you'll have situations where people drink it expecting it to taste like cow milk.
Right.
And when the taste, it doesn't meet that expectation,
Right.
you may have a negative reaction in the beginning. But we also see if they then drink it again, knowing that, this wasn't milk, this is something else, right?
Right.
You reprogram, different synopses coming in here, and people all of a sudden, it's like, I'm not saying every single person likes it.
Right.
It's not meant.
Right, yeah.
I hope not. We are humans after all, and diversity is important.
Yes.
But it's very unusual that people don't like it.
Right. And I think that's such an honest thing to say, and it's such a contrast between, especially in this country, we were fed for the longest time. I remember the commercials when I was a young child about milk. constantly paraded around as on TV all the time. It was so important for you to drink milk every single day.
Yeah.
And of course, now we're finding out, things are coming out, that it was the dairy lobby and the dairy
Yeah.
industry that was paying for these commercials. And you don't see, there's a reason you don't see them anymore, the commercials for the milk like this. Because I think the most famous campaign perhaps was the Got Milk campaign.
Yeah.
Was incredibly successful in the
Yeah.
United States and led to a huge increase in the sales of dairy.
Right.
But it was always, for strong milk for
Right.
strong bones. And
Yeah.
it always had...
That's being debunked.
Exactly.
By study after study.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. There was another study published at University of Lund that looked at the social aspects of milk and dairy in Scandinavia then, or in Sweden, and we think that milk is something humans have always consumed, right? Couldn't be more wrong.
Really?
Modern milk consumption, if you go back, starts in the 1930s, right? That we drank milk.
Yeah.
Before the 1930s, nobody had the ability to refrigerate, so milk out of the cow would turn sour and bad right away, unless you fermented it and made a yogurt out of it, which is a very cultural thing, Caucasus Mountains of Scandinavia, all over, right? A very deeply rooted tradition. You can keep it now for longer days. If you can't refrigerate it, you can keep it for weeks. And you can have that little culture that you keep moving, right?
Right.
So you set a little aside, pour milk over it, and put it down in your basement or whatever.
Right.
And that's how you kept the yogurt culture. The other way, of course, is making cheese. Which can store for a long time, right? Those are the traditional ways of eating dairy.
Yeah. Not the drinking of the milk.
No, and it was even considered dangerous, and quite rightly so, because you milked, the risk of bacterial infections when you milked before, we knew how to sterilize before we knew the cleanliness and whatnot. So people were absolutely told not to drink milk.
Wow.
So here we think that, of course, this is, it really is it's a post-World War I invention. And in order to educate people to drink milk, it was immediately sponsored. And this is interesting, go through all Western countries, right? US, Scandinavia, UK, all the countries where you drink a lot of milk. It was sponsored by the government. You started... In Sweden, it was called the Milk Propaganda. That was the name,
wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And they started TV commercials with adults drinking milk with the children.
Wow.
Or TV. It wasn't TV, but in the movie theaters, right? How you communicated then.
Right.
And in order, so when you build up, and I think there were a couple of drivers behind it from a government point of view. It was determined that if you develop a dairy industry, it's a way to drive modernization and efficiencies in the farming industry, period.
Right.
So if you create a demand and you can secure that demand, so the producer always have supply, can always offset its supply, right?
Right.
Then they have the mechanism to create modern and invest in their farms and develop the farming, it'd be more efficient. And so in that sense, there's something good here. And you've seen third world countries, India, others, trying to mimic that. China, for sure, the last 25 years, right? Create a milk demand. The demand will create a supply situation, and the supply there will drive mechanization, modernization,
right,
efficiency in the farming industry. But it all hinges on that you can, when you produce your milk, you can actually sell it. So there, this government subsidies kick in to take care of that part. Don't worry, we'll take care of that for you, right? So milk companies can market to school children in schools with their brands. Wow. No other company can do that, right? And retail built their whole infrastructure on having retail, the cold milk in the, for the furthest corner in the stores, everybody had to walk through there, right? But they always accepted lower margins on dairy. So that's an indirect subsidy, right? And then, of course, the government has spent millions and millions and millions on trying to tell us that this is actually really good.
Right.
Not trying, they're
They're telling us.
Yeah, they're telling us, right?
Yeah.
Based on what we today see, pretty dubious facts.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that we're both from cultures that we were just pushing milk, pushing milk. And as you said, I think you mentioned you're on a flight and you noticed that there's an Asian man drinking like a. Oh, by the way, it is 2:06. So if you need to, I know you had a call that you had to attend to, so we can wrap it up.
Should we take a quick break?
Yes, absolutely, of course, yeah. Now the purpose of Oatly is, I love this. There's a little tagline that I read. But basically to make it easy for people to turn what they eat and drink into personal moments of healthy joy, which I think is cool. That's a cool thing to do because usually it's one or the other. You have to choose something that is going to taste good or something that's going to be healthy for you. And so to be able to have both is really nice. We were joking before we went off air, but I heard this makes a very nice White Russian. You can do a little. Speaking of healthy.
yeah. Well, it's a healthier
White
Russian.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very good in coffee. It's my favorite actually that I've had it in so far has been a cold brew.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just something about it's really nice. Yeah.
No, that's it's a big trend, and obviously, yes, I think in many ways, cold brews put more emphasis on flavor than the hot Joe.
Right.
And I think it's just a great mix for us. We found we've done product, traditional fruit flavored drink mixes, strawberry, mango, orange, whatever, pear, apple, all that stuff, and they're really tasty. But it's also a space when you have that kind of beverage that's very competitive. You compete with sodas, you compete with fruit juices, smoothies, everything.
Right.
It's hard to and we don't really add any particular additional value. We add some oat fiber and whatnot, right? But if you look at our product in coffee, in matcha, we make it really good matcha with Oatly, or chai. I mean, it's so tea, various types of tea and coffee and cocoa. The Oatly chocolate is just a whole other dimension, right?
Wow.
So when you look at that type of flavored products, that are really where we see our product really add. 1 + 1 becomes something more, significantly more than 2.
Right.
And so you'll see more products from us in that space. Or, we collaborate with others that work in that space, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And growing up in Sweden, I was going to ask, so obviously milk is a huge staple of the diet there. Is that shifting the way that it is in the United States, where they're starting to realize, they're starting to become realizations that...
I think I'm not sure. I think China is possibly one of the very few countries in the world where dairy consumption is going up.
Really?
Most countries I'm talking broadly, and Western countries, dairy consumption has been shrinking for the last 20, 30 years.
Wow.
It's a sliding slope. I think in the US it went down 5, if not even 7. I'm not exactly sure on the exact number. Somewhere between 5 and 7% last year.
Wow.
Which is a significant decrease, right?
Right.
And similarly in Sweden, it's starting to reach those numbers. Now, I'm not saying that non-dairy or plant-based milks is replacing that whole, because that's not just true. They don't take all of that, but they certainly take a portion of it.
Right.
So there is a clear trend across the globe here away from milk.
Right.
In general, right? You see subcategories. I think yogurts and certainly some cheeses and whatnot that are not shrinking, right? But the big volume in dairy is milk.
Right.
White milk is where the big volume is, and that is shrinking. So the coffee trend that started, I guess, globally really with Starbucks was a lifeline to the dairy industry for a number of years, because it sort of slowed that shrink.
Right.
I mean, think about it, right? I remember talking to a buyer at Starbucks once, and they laughed about it and said, "Yeah, we're not really a coffee house. We're a milk bar that also sells coffee."
Wow.
Because in that cup, right? I think Starbucks is probably still today the number one dairy buyer in the world,
Really?
right?
Wow.
So, but think about it: the big cup of a tall or a whatever they call them, large.
Yeah.
It's just milk
Yeah.
with a sprinkle of coffee. Right?
Yeah. Right.
So that's really been a lifeline. But now we see in California the most influential, trendy coffee bars in California. Probably 50% of all dairy is plant-based.
Wow.
So it's
That's
a
a
big
huge
trend,
shift.
right? And we see in the teenagers that used to be. When I came home from school, I would go to the fridge, I'll take a package of milk, and I'll drink it
Right.
like that, right, out
Right.
of the container. My mom would be totally, and particularly if I had a couple of friends too, I will raid that fridge in minutes,
Yeah.
right, on milk.
Yeah.
You look at that, kids don't do that anywhere near to the same extent. So the dairy industry is effectively losing the entire new generation. They are not dairy drinkers.
Wow.
They're completely, so the big dairy, it's the older and, our age, middle age, whatever, so
Right.
that still stick to those traditions, right?
Right.
But the younger generation is lost for them.
Wow.
And they turn in very large extent to plant-based dairy for their coffee experience, their tea and chai, and for their cereals or whatever, maybe not at all, right? They may go completely, where they usually used to drink milk.
It's gone.
It's gone.
Post-milk generation.
The post-milk generation.
Wow.
And I think that's it's not talked about much, but you see it clearly in the books, in the statistics.
The writing is on the wall.
The writing is on the wall,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think in some ways, it's good for the dairy industry, because another pet peeve of mine is the dairy industry, because of that subsidized and protected supply, the demand side, right, has always been there, protected. The government takes care of you. We buy whatever you produce and we sell it to schools, or in the U.S., they, as part of the food coupons to Native Americans or whatever, right?
Right.
They can't drink it anyway, but they get it cheap. So
Right.
uh,
Because milk is still included on. I know my friend recently had a horrible knee injury, and his employer issued him a EBT card. So essentially, he had a disability, so
Right.
he could get.
and milk was part of that.
And milk was part of
Yeah,
it,
of course.
and I
The
thought that was
government is there, right?
I thought that was
Part
interesting.
of the subsidy system.
Right.
But so that's being increasingly challenged, and absolutely. So there's what I see, that the dairy industry and tend to be, as a generalization, if you look at the big dairy companies, fairly arrogant towards their consumers and competition and others, right? They come out of a semi-protected world. They're arrogant. They never, ever, for their life, cared 1 second about their consumers. Not at all.
Yeah.
They will, of course, vehemently protest.
Yeah.
Say, oh, no, we did market research.
Yeah.
We asked our consumers. It's BS. They never cared because they didn't have to.
Yeah.
Today, all of a sudden, and you start to see some things happen here in the U.S. There's innovation in the dairy industry. It's never been there before.
Right.
Oh, what a new concept. We need to think about our consumers, and maybe they don't want what we have. Maybe we should do something else,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe we have to start tweak our products. Maybe we can't get the big volume.
Yeah.
But so let's get rid of half of our herds, right? But if I can sell half at the higher price, maybe I can still make a living, right?
Right.
Who knows?
Right.
So, premiumization of yogurts is a good example. I mean, I came to the U.S. 20 years ago, and the yogurts in this country, excuse my French, were, well, not good. Right? Today, you can buy easily, readily in many stores really nice, high-quality yogurts.
Yes.
Right? That's a complete change in
Yes.
20 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's an example. I mean, you can see much more of that. And people start learning. I mean, you go to the cheese shelf in New England, and you have 50 feet of cheddar cheese, right?
Right.
Well, where's the variation? Where's the, but that's changing too.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of really boutique cheeses made in this country that are to die for. They're really good.
Right. Yeah, it is starting to become more. It is this paradigm shift.
That's the future for the dairy industry. Close down those stinking, 20,000 herd mega, plants that are, cruel on the animals, cruel on the planet, stink, ugly.
Absolutely.
And go back to have grass-fed cows, that cutesy little cows that roam in the fields and chew the grass, and you produce a few gallons of significantly less amount of milk that tastes better.
Yeah.
And is used for premium products. Right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It is just it's mass production. It's something like
it's awful.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yes.
Horrible.
And it is, and it's it's probably in order to meet the demand that they had created by creating this industry in the first place. But now that the demand is starting to wane, I mean, I remember I had a friend.
Lost generation. They
Yes.
can never come back to what they once were.
No, I don't. It won't, because now the truth is that we live in an age where you can find out what is really happening and the true information. There's studies that are coming out, and but I remember I had a friend in college who was on a diet that he was trying to gain weight. He was trying to, get a muscle. He was trying to get bigger, and it was called the diet was called GOMAD. And GOMAD is an acronym. It stands for a gallon of milk every day. And yes, and he did religiously would buy a gallon of milk every single day and consume it. Now he has bone problems, and I don't know if it's linked, but I mean, it's not hard to see the connection there. I mean, it's
Sweden has it's certainly we have higher per capita consumption of dairy than the U.S. Right? We have a higher prevalence of osteoporosis. So.
That's right. I remember reading that the top 5 countries with the highest rates of milk consumption also just happen to be the top 5 countries with the highest rates of osteoporosis.
As it happens, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting now that we, post-milk generation. It is. It's. I think all these things are starting to come out now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that was magnificent. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I learned a lot today. Yes, and thanks for coming on, and hopefully we'll do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Take 2.
Yes, absolutely. I wish you the best. You can go find this stuff. You're getting it's gonna hit the shelves soon, or what's in the works right now?
So the team here in the U.S. are doing a magnificent job, and they're working hard on developing distribution across the country.
Okay.
Step 1, they're targeting the coffee trade, quite simply,
Right.
because we just have an exemplary product that fits a big need right now, and we see cafes all over the place replacing almond and soy milk with oat milk. It's going very rapidly.
Wow.
And we're very happy about that, of course, and we will support that. And then later, at some point, there'll be other products and other distribution channels.
Awesome. Well, a lot of my listeners are in the Pacific Northwest, so if you're in Seattle, you can go to Cloud City Coffee. You can find Oatly there. You can find it at Diablo and Queen Anne. You can also find it in Portland at Dapper on Division Street. So that's it for now, but it's everyone I've talked to, all the baristas, they love it. They absolutely can't get enough of it. So I'm sure there will be more soon.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Thanks, Jesse.
Of course. That was fun. I learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Beautiful.
And I'll let you carry on with your day.
So, back to reality. It's great.
Thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to subscribe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Leave a review if you like it. It really helps us out. You can find us on Instagram at @lastpodcast. Twitter is the same thing, at @lastpodcast. If you want to write us any mail, anything like that, it's @lastpodcast@gmail.com. We have shirts coming on the way, guys. We'll have them up on the website at lastpodcast.com. And if there's anything else, just let us know. Please comment on the YouTube videos if you like. All right, we'll see you guys next week.